Simon says subscribe and click on the bell icon to receive notifications.
All right, let's begin, guys. You've got your file. Welcome, as I said. We are doing dynamic arrays today. For anybody who is joining our webinars for the first time, I know we always do get a few new people every single month. I'll just briefly introduce myself. So my name is Deborah Ashby. I am a Microsoft trainer and I've been using and training Excel for about 25 years now. So a really, really long time. And I absolutely love Excel and I'm really excited to go through this session today because dynamic array functions are probably one of my most used and favorite things in Excel. So if you're not familiar with them, hopefully this will give you a good introduction and then you can go on and explore more. We might even do some more webinars on dynamic arrays because there is a lot to them. Lovely. All right. So the first thing I should point out when it comes to dynamic array formulas in Excel is that they're not available in all versions of Excel. So the ones that we're going to be focusing on today, they're available in Microsoft 365. So if you have Excel for Microsoft 365, you are fine. Excel 2019 and Excel 2021 only. So if you have Excel 2016 or older, you're not going to have these functions. Okay, so just a warning. If you don't have these, then this entire session is going to be about dynamic array functions in Excel. Now, when it comes to dynamic array functions, there's so many of them these days. Microsoft released about 8 of them, I think, a couple of years ago, and then they've literally just released in the last few months another 10. Now, the 10 that they've just released are only available in Microsoft 365, no other version currently. So I'm not focusing on those ones in this session simply because so few people have them. What we're going to do is we're going to focus mainly on the ones which were released a couple of years ago, and I'm going to show you some really practical examples as to why and how they're useful when you're doing things on a day-to-day basis. So we're going to discuss what are dynamic arrays in case you're not really sure, and then we're just going to go through many of these dynamic arrays. So we're going to take a look at unique, we're going to look at filter, sort and sort by, RANDARRAY. I'm going to talk to you about spill errors and sequence. And then right at the end, I am going to show you 3 of the brand new dynamic arrays that have just been released, because these 3 are awesome. So if you were ever thinking about upgrading to Microsoft 365, for me, these are a reason to do it because these are amazing if you work in Excel. So we're going to take a look at all of these. So what are dynamic array formulas? Well, dynamic arrays are effectively resizable arrays that calculate automatically and return values into multiple cells based on a formula that's entered into a single cell. Now, that is a lot to get your head around without seeing an example. So let's open up our workbook. So this is where you need to open the workbook that I sent through to you. And I will open up mine. And we're working on the tab called Basic. Now, I have a very basic little table of data just here, just some fruits, the quantity and the price. So in general, if we want to work out what the total is here, we would do something like this. We would say equals, we might do quantity multiplied by price. That is what we call one formula, one cell, okay? And that is sort of the premise that Excel has always historically worked off of. If we want to copy this formula down, we can click or double click our autofill handle, or we can drag it down and it's going to copy that formula down. And that is always how Excel has traditionally worked. One cell, one formula. Now, what dynamic arrays allow us to do is perform multiple calculations in one go. So instead of typing the formula into each cell and copying it down, what I could do here is I could type in equals, I could select all of the quantity, so a cell range as opposed to a single cell, multiplied by this range just here. Now, previously in older versions of Excel, in order to get this to calculate correctly, we used to have to press Control-Shift-Enter. It was always called the CSE method, and it's how dynamic array formulas were calculated. But in the newer versions of Excel, the later versions, we don't need to press Control Shift Enter anymore. We can simply press Enter, and it's going to essentially perform that calculation, but it's going to spill the results down the rest of the cells. So this is the behavior. It's called spilling, where we enter in a formula in one cell and it spills the results out into other cells. That is basically a dynamic array formula. And one thing that you'll note about these dynamic array formulas is if you take a look in the formula bar where we have our formula calculation, if we click in the cell underneath, notice that it's grayed out in the formula bar. And this is another sort of property or behavior of dynamic arrays in that they can only be edited in the cell you originally typed them into. Okay, and this whole behavior is called spilling. And we're going to talk more about spilling a bit later on. But that is just to give you a basic understanding of what a dynamic array is if you weren't sure. So now we have that in our mind and we sort of have a bit of an idea as to what they do. Let's take a look at dynamic arrays in action, because some of these things I'm going to show you are so useful. So we're going to start out with one of my favorites, and that is the unique function. Honestly, when this was released, I was like, oh, I can't believe it. This is the function that I've been looking for my entire life. What this will allow us to do is it will allow us to extract a unique list from a range of cells. So effectively, it's almost like it removes duplicates from a list, and it is so simple to use. So you can see here, I have another table of data. So let's just say that this is for invoices. Okay, we have an invoice number column, we have a date column, we have a client column, amount, and status. Now, maybe over here in columns I and J, I simply want a list of all of the clients, and then I want to maybe work out their total using a SUMIFS formula. Now, if you take a look at my table over here, you can see that my clients repeat. Okay, so they're not individuals. I have Facebook a number of times here. I have Gramson, I have Gaggle, I have Oracled. So I have duplicates of the client names. Now over here, I just want a unique list. So this is where we can use unique. And it is so simple. We simply select the array, which is just another name for a range of cells, close the bracket, hit enter, and it's basically going to remove those duplicates and just give us a list of all of those unique clients. And then, of course, once we have this list, we can then do whatever calculation we need based off of this list. So maybe I want to find out how much each client has paid. Okay, so I want to sum the amount column for each client. So that is where I would use a SUMIFS. SUMIFS isn't a dynamic array formula, but while we're here, we might as well do it. SUMIFS will allow me to sum whatever I specify. So I want to sum the amounts, and we're going to lock those cells when the criteria is equal to Facebook. So where are we going to find the criteria? We're going to find it over here. That's our criteria range, and our criteria is Facebook. And I need to lock this if I want to copy it down by pressing F4. Close the bracket, and then I can copy that down. So that's a really nice practical way of how you can use unique to extract a unique list from a table and then utilize it with other formulas like SUMIFS to get your totals. Okay, so unique is an absolutely amazing formula. Now, one thing that you'll find here when you're using unique, if I was to add more invoices to the bottom here, so let's just copy this bottom one and let's just paste it down here. And I'm just going to change the client name to something else. Let's go for Snapple. Notice that the clients don't update over here. It doesn't add Snapple on the end here. Now, I can get that to add it automatically because in general, it's always good to make everything that we're doing dynamic. I can get it to add automatically by putting my data set into a table. So I'm going to delete out the unique function and let's get rid of these SUMIFS as well. And let's put our data into a table this time. So Control T. Yes, my table has headers. Let's click on OK. And that is very horrible formatting. So let's go to table styles and I'm just going to switch it to none. Now, remember with tables, if you're not used to using tables, tables are one of the best things you can ever use in Excel because they have this auto expand capability. So anytime you add anything onto the bottom of a table, it will automatically update anything that's using that table data. Now, I'm going to name my table. If we go up to the table design ribbon, over in the first group here, can you see it says table 1? So we have a default table name. I'm going to change this to invoices and hit enter. So now if I'm using unique over here, what I can do is say unique, and then I can use the column like that. I can just select it. So you can see now, instead of cell references, we get table references. So it's telling me that I'm using the invoices table and I've selected the client column. When I close it, we get exactly the same result, and that is we get a list of clients. But this time, if I was to add another invoice on the end here, so let's do Control C, Control V, and I'm going to change this to Snapple again. Whoops. Snapple. There we go. Can you see that it automatically updates? Okay, so just bear that in mind. Putting things in a table and combining that with dynamic arrays is a really powerful way of making your entire worksheet really dynamic and easy to update. Okay, so that is unique. Now, another way that I love to use unique is I use unique all the time when I'm creating data validation drop-down lists. And we're actually going to use it again as we talk through our second example. We're now working on the filter and sort worksheets. So filter and sort, let's deal with filter first of all, because this is another really popular dynamic array function and people really love this function. And some people don't really get why we use it because people say, well, you know, we already have many ways of filtering data in Excel, which is true. Again, we have our same data set, our invoices, and the traditional way to filter this data set would be to essentially just add some filters at the top here, those little drop down arrows. So if we go to the data tab, we can turn on filters and we get our little drop downs. So if I click the drop down here, I can choose what I want to filter by. I'm sure we all know how to use this. It's going to filter the list below. So why do we need a function specifically related to filtering? Well, there are a couple of drawbacks of using this little drop down method. The first one being you can only filter your data in place. So I can only filter my data in this specific range of cells in this table. I can't select a filter from here and have it output the results over here. Okay, so we're very much restricted to where our filtered results are going to be. And also we can't combine it with formulas to make the filtering more powerful. So that is essentially what the filter formula allows us to do. We can output the results of the filter anywhere to any cells, and we can also combine it with other formulas and functions to make it even more powerful. And one way that I see people combining other formulas with filter a lot is by using sort. So people will filter their data and then they will sort it using the new sort dynamic array function. And that's pretty much what we're going to do here, but we're also going to use unique. So we're going to, or what we're aiming to do here is I want to be able to choose a client from a drop-down menu in cell J4. So we're going to build a little data validation list based off of the clients that we have in here. And I want to be able to select a client from this drop down and then have it produce down here just the invoices. So it's effectively applying a filter based on whatever we've selected in the data validation up here. So the first step of this is building our data validation list, and we want to make sure that we have unique values in our data validation. So again, this is another way that I love to use the unique formula to work with data validation. So somewhere over here, it doesn't matter where, just in a random column, I'm going to, again, get a unique list of all of the clients. Now, you could put this into a table, again, to make everything completely unique. I'm not going to at this stage. We're just going to select these and hit enter. So we have our little list of unique clients over here. And if you take a look in the formula bar, there is our unique formula. Now, I could also use the sort dynamic array formula to sort my unique list alphabetically. So while we're here, let's do that. I can add sort onto the beginning. So this is another dynamic array function. You can see the arguments underneath. The first argument is the array. Now, if I click on this, it's going to highlight the unique function. So our array is basically being generated by the unique function. So we just need to go on to the end here, comma, and provide the sort index. So this is where we can choose what we want to sort by, or if we want to sort descending, ascending, things like that. Now, you don't have to add anything onto the end here. You can just simply close the bracket and it will sort them. The default is to sort them at A to Z. So you don't have to actually add anything onto the end if that's what you want to do. So now I have these sorted. So now I have this, I can build my data validation dropdown. So let's click in cell J4. We're going to go up to data, and then in the data tools group, we're going to choose data validation. And if you've never used this before, the most popular one, there's lots of different types of data validation that you can do in here, but by far the most popular is to create a drop-down list in a cell. So we're going to choose list, and then we just need to provide our source. So my source is going to be my unique list of clients that I have in column O. Now I could go in and I could select the entire range like that, but with dynamic arrays, you don't actually even have to do that. All you need to do is select the first one and add the hash symbol on the end. Okay, that hash symbol basically means the spill range. So it will pick up everything within that spill range. Remember, that's the terminology we use when we're working with dynamic arrays. So if I click on OK, I now get a little drop down and there is my list of clients. So that's another way that you can use unique. We've seen how we can use sort to sort that list, and we've built out our data validation drop down. So now that we have this, we need to use this to filter our table of results based on what we've selected in the data validation list. So this is where we can use the filter function. Now, it's worth noting here that I'm going to be returning all of the columns from this table. So I want to return invoice number, date, client amount, and status. You don't have to return all of the columns. It might be that you only want to return the invoice number, the date, and the client. That's absolutely fine. And I'll show you where you specify this. So if we type in filter first of all, the first argument is the array. So this is where you specify what columns you want to return. So I want to return everything, so I'm going to select everything. But if you only wanted to return 3 of the columns, you would just need to select 3 of them. Okay, so you specify your array. So let's go for this just here, B5 to F24, comma, and then you specify what you want to include. Okay, so we want to include when the client equals whatever we have in cell J4. So I want to include when this column is equal to what we have up here. Okay. Now, the last argument of filter is an optional argument. It's in square brackets, which means it's not mandatory. We could end our formula now, but let's add this in. What this says is, if it doesn't find any results, what do you want it to say? So I'm just going to put in quote marks. If it can't find anything or nothing matches, we're just going to have no invoices in there. Let's close the bracket and hit enter, and you can see the results are being returned for Gramzon. If I change this to Facebook, I'm getting those results. Okay, so this works really, really well. Now, again, with these dynamic array formulas, notice if I click in this cell, I can go up to the formula bar and I can edit the filter. If I click in one of these other cells, I can't. It's grayed out. So now that we have this very basic filter, you can also filter on multiple criteria. So we just specified one piece of criteria here. Our criteria was simply that we filter for this particular client. So one piece of criteria. Now, maybe I want to filter on two pieces of criteria. Maybe I want to filter for all clients that match what we've selected in the data validation dropdown, but only clients that have a status of, let's say, paid. Okay, so we have two pieces of criteria. How are we going to set up our filter? Well, let's delete it out and start again. We're going to go for filter one more time. Our array, again, I want to return everything. So we're going to select everything. Then when it comes to what we want to include, if you have more than one piece of criteria, you need to put it in brackets. So we're going to open a bracket. And the first thing we want to include is basically what we included last time. So we want to say when the client is equal to what we have in cell J4. That's our first piece of criteria. We close the bracket. We then need to do multiply in here, or asterisk. And what this asterisk means is basically and, okay? And then we have our second piece of criteria. So I want it to filter for all clients that are equal to oracled in this example, and when they have a status of paid. So our second piece of criteria is going to be when this column is equal to, and we're just going to say paid. And close the bracket. Again, if we want to add in that optional last argument, we can add in no invoices on the end there. Okay, enter, and you can see that's exactly what we get. Let's make sure it's working for other ones. There you go. There's an example of that third or that optional argument in action. It hasn't found any invoices for Gramson with a status of paid, and so we're getting no invoices. If we select oracled, we have a few in there. Okay, so this filter formula is really, really useful. Now, you could carry on adding different pieces of criteria. Again, if you cast your eyes up into the formula bar, if I wanted to add a third piece of criteria, I would just repeat this pattern. I would click at the end here. I would do another asterisk, meaning and then put my third piece of criteria in closed brackets. So you can really expand on this and really customize it however you like. It's also worth noting with this filter formula, you can change the little operator that you're using. So instead of doing an and, I could change the asterisk to a plus, and we're effectively doing an or there. So you can see that the results have now completely changed because it's now looking for where clients are equal to oracled or if the status is paid. Okay, so if you can see one with not paid in there, that's going to be oracled because it's going to include both. All right. And there are other things apart from asterisks and plus that you can use in your filter formula to get it to do different things. And I would highly recommend that you do jump online and take a look at the different operators that you can use with filter, because it can get really, really interesting. And of course, with this, we can then combine it with the sort dynamic array if we want to sort our results. So maybe I want to sort these by date. I can go up to my filter formula in the formula bar. I can add sort onto the beginning. My array is being generated by the filter formula. So if we click at the end here, I can then choose my sort index. Now, a sort index is basically the column number that you want to sort by. So if I wanted to sort my results by the date column, that is column number 2 in the table. So my sort index here would be 2. I could close it, hit enter, and it's going to sort them by that date column. Again, if I don't specify ascending or descending, it's going to do ascending by default. All right, so that is how you can combine all of these different formulas together. And just on a side note, we also have sort by. Now, I would definitely say that sort by I use a lot less than I use sort. Sort by is very similar to sort, except instead of sorting on a range of cells like sort does, sort by sorts a range of cells by another range or array. Okay. So it does work in a little bit of a different way. So I'll show you a very quick example. I'm not going to linger too long on this because most of the time you're probably going to use sort. But we do have sort by in here. And we can choose the array, again, what we want to return. I want to return all of the columns, so I can select everything just here. I've got this in a table, which is why it's saying table 3. And then instead of providing a sort index number like we did last time, which is a column number 1, 2, 3, 4, this time we choose an array that we want to sort by. So maybe I want to sort by, what should we sort by? Let's go for clients, why not? I would select this array, and then I can choose the sort order, ascending or descending. So let's do -1 for descending. Close the bracket, hit enter, and it's basically going to sort that information as I've specified. Okay, so there's a very small difference between sort and sort by. One uses an index number, one uses an array to sort by. So we've moved through quite a few of these. Let's move on to some of the ones which I think are quite fun. So we're going to move on to RANDARRAY. Now, RANDARRAY, again, this is one of the newer dynamic functions. This will allow you to generate a array of random numbers, as it might suggest by the name. Now, why would this be useful to you? Why would you need random numbers in cells? Well, I have to say that for me and the type of work that I do, I use RANDARRAY all the time because I'm constantly generating data sets and practice files for sessions like we're in now. And I need to have sample data. So a lot of the time, if I just want to get some random numbers into a spreadsheet so that I can use them in a webinar as an example, I will use the RANDARRAY function. So this might be something that you find useful if you want to generate your own dummy data. So let me just show you how it works. It is so simple. You can see here I've got a little table. We have months, January to December, and we've just put Q1 to Q4. And maybe I just want to fill all of these cells in the middle with some randomly generated numbers. Or we can use RANDARRAY to do this. You can see here we've got quite a few arguments. They are all optional, which is slightly weird, but they are all optional. We're going to use all of them. The first thing is we need to specify the number of rows. So how many rows of random numbers do we want? Now, in this case, because I want a small amount of rows, I only want January to December, I know that the number of rows I want is 12. I'm going to show you in a moment how you can do this if you have a very, very if you have a large amount of rows, a much quicker way of doing this instead of counting them all. But for the time being, we're just going to say 12 rows. We then specify how many columns of random numbers we want generated. So I have Q1 to Q4, so that's 4 columns. And then you can specify a minimum value and a maximum value. And RANDARRAY will generate random numbers between those two values. So let's just say 100 is our minimum and 200 is our maximum. And the final argument is if you want these numbers as a decimal or if you want them as an integer. So let's use true on the end here and generate some integers. Close the bracket, hit enter, and you can see what happens here. Now, I already had currency formatting applied to this range of cells. Ordinarily, yours would look like that once you'd finished the array formula. But once you have these in here, you can very simply apply your formatting, and in a very quick amount of time, you've managed to generate a whole bunch of numbers. Okay, so it can be really useful if you're trying to practice formulas and things like that. Now, let me show you one more example of RANDARRAY where we have a very large amount of rows and we don't necessarily want to count down them all. We can combine RANDARRAY with count A. So what we could do here is we can get Excel to count the rows for us. So instead of rows, instead of typing in 12 or whatnot, we could say count A, and then we would just need to highlight the column or the range. I can do this very quickly, Control Shift down arrow, and that will basically count the number of rows for us. And I could do the same with the columns. So I could say count A again, and I want it to count the number of columns, and then we're back into our arguments. So let's say minimum value 100, maximum 200, and this time we'll go for decimals. Let's go for decimals, close the bracket, hit enter, and again, it's going to generate. If I don't have formatting applied, it would be decimals in here. Okay, so that is how you can combine RANDARRAY with count A if you have a large data set and you don't want to count down different rows. Now, another thing to notice with this particular function is this is what we call a volatile function. Now, if I start clicking around and doing things, so if I double click up here to resize the columns, can you see as I do that, the numbers in the table are changing constantly? And this is what a volatile function does. It constantly refreshes when you start clicking around. Now, it might be that you're fine with that, but a lot of the time, if I've done this, if I was going to use this working data set here and start to do some calculations or maybe create charts, I don't want this data or these numbers changing every single time I'm clicking around and doing something. So this is where once I've done this, I would then select everything in here. I would say Control C, and then I would choose to paste the values only. Okay, so what that will do is it will throw away the RANDARRAY formula underneath, and now these numbers aren't going to change when we're doing different things. Okay, so just be aware of that. It's a volatile function that changes. Now, another thing you need to be made aware of is if we delete out all of this, is spill errors. Now, as we know with these dynamic array functions, the results spill across or spill down different cells. And you will occasionally maybe get a spill error. Now, the most common reason for a spill error is the fact that it doesn't have enough room to spill across different cells. So if I had something in here, I'm just going to say hello. If I had something already in here and then I was trying to use RANDARRAY, so let's just quickly say 12, 4, we'll go for 1 and 10. Let's just do that. I'm getting a spill error. Okay. If I click on the triangle, it basically tells me spill range isn't blank. So it knows that it needs to spill this formula down 12 rows, but it can't because there's already something there. Okay, so be aware of that because that's something that comes up pretty often when you're working with dynamic arrays. Lovely. Let's do a quick time check. We're doing pretty good for time. Let's move on to sequence. Now, sequence is another one of those little functions that can be really useful in your day-to-day work. And all it does is it basically generates a list of sequential numbers. So how can we use this in a helpful way? Well, let me show you an example. Maybe here I want to list out, maybe I'm listing out some participants in a race, let's say. And I want to have participant number 1, and then I want the participant, we're going to say Tom Bruce, and then I want participant number 2, so I need to go back over here, number 2, and we've got Emma Scone, and then I need to go to the next one. And it's a little bit tedious, but it's not too much of a problem. But we could use sequence to help us out with this and really kind of get this to automate itself so that the numbers are automatically input as we add the names. So sequence in itself, let's take a look at the arguments. So sequence will generate a sequential list of numbers. So let's just take a look at it in its most basic form first of all. So again, we can specify the number of rows that we want. So let's say we want 10 rows. I'm going to say 1 column. I want to start at number 1 and I want to step up by 1. That's what we're going to get. So let's take a look at it. We have our 10 rows. We have 1 column. We start at number 1 and the step value is 1. So it just goes up by 1 each time. We could modify this and I could say step value is 10 as opposed to 1. And it's going to go 1, 11, 21, so on and so forth. You could say that you want 20 rows instead. Or maybe you want to start at a completely different value. So maybe you don't want to start at 1. Maybe you want to start at 10 and go up by 10. All right. So there's lots of different ways that you can use sequence to generate lists of numbers. So how can this be useful for us if we want it to automatically generate numbers as we type names into a column? Well, again, what we can do with sequence is we can cleverly combine it with count A. We can combine it with count A. We can select column C, which is where I'm going to type in the participant names. close off two brackets, and then what happens is when I enter name and hit enter, it automatically adds the next number. Okay, pretty cool. Now, one thing you can do to make this even better is notice that when I hit return, it automatically puts the number in before I've typed in a name. And this can look a little bit messy. If I wanted to stop there, if there was only 3 participants, I sort of have this number hanging over at the end. So we can modify this formula again. And all we need to do up here is after the column, if we just type in -1, hit enter, we're not going to get that. Okay, so it's going to work perfectly. Okay, so sequence can be combined with other functions like count A to make things like automated lists, or you can just use it to generate sequential numbers, which can be really helpful in itself. So those are the main sort of 6 dynamic array formulas that I wanted to speak to you about. Remember, those are the ones that are available in Excel for Microsoft 365, Excel 2019 and 2021. I am going to show you a couple more formulas, but these are the brand new ones, which have only been released in the last couple of months and are currently only available to Microsoft 365 users. But these are so awesome. I wanted to add them in at the end. And once these are a bit more prevalent and more people are using them, I'm going to do a webinar on all of these because I think there's 10 or 12 new functions that they've released in the last couple of months, and they're all pretty cool. But these are by far my favorite, and these are the ones that I think are the most useful out of the entire bunch. Now, what I'm going to show you are the functions TEXTBEFORE, TEXTAFTER, and TEXTSPLIT. And if you've ever had to clean data, if you've ever had to break up data across columns, there are numerous different methods that we can use to do this. So let's take a look at a couple of the older methods that we would use to break data up across columns. And again, we've just got a simple example. I have some full names just here. You might recognize some of these. And I want to split them into first name and last name. So there's many different ways we can do this. Probably the quickest and easiest is to use Flash Fill. So with Flash Fill, we just need to type in the first one and press Control E, and it's going to copy it down. Okay. If you weren't sure about that, let me do it again. We can type in the second one, Control E to copy down. That is by far the quickest way of breaking up these names in this example. Now, Flash Fill doesn't work in every single situation. It works in a situation like this because we have our columns next to each other. But if I had a blank column in between here, or maybe I wanted to output it somewhere else in the spreadsheet, Flash Fill isn't going to work. It only really works if the columns are right next to each other. Okay, so we need to know other methods for breaking up data. What else could we do here? Well, another really popular old school method is using text to columns, everybody's favorite. We could select all of these, go up to the data tab, text to columns, and we can click on next and we can choose our delimiter. So where do we want to split these names? Well, we want to split them where we have a space, okay? And then when we click on next, we can say, output it to this destination just here, and it's going to split up those names for us. So those are the methods that most people know when it comes to breaking up data across different columns. You might also use text functions, left, right, mid, in order to do this. But lots of these methods fall down when what you're trying to split up is slightly more complicated. This example is really easy. Most things can handle this. But what about if we have people or some of these students with a middle initial? You can see here we've got Brian P. Gosling, Emma K. Scone. But this isn't consistent. Not everybody has a middle initial. So when you have inconsistency, that's when it becomes a little bit more difficult to break up these names. And to do this, you wouldn't be able to use Flash Fill. That wouldn't work. Text to columns will also not work. The only method you could use here would be to use text functions, left, right, and mid. And those can get really, really complicated. And I feel like Microsoft have listened to everybody who is constantly saying to them, The left, right, and mid functions are too complicated. Nobody remembers them. They've listened and they've brought in these much simpler functions for splitting up text. So let me show you how awesome these are. Let's do the first name first of all. I'm going to use TEXTBEFORE to do this. So the first argument of TEXTBEFORE is simply the text that we want to break up, F6. All we then need to do is specify the delimiter. So we're saying output all of the text before the first space. So our delimiter is a space. Notice that the next arguments are all optional. We can define the instance number in the next step. Okay, so I want the first instance of the space. I want to extract everything before that first space. Now, one instance or the first instance is the default. So I don't need to give the instance number argument. I can simply do that. And it's going to extract that first name. Double click to copy down. Okay, nice and straightforward. What about the last name? Because last name was a little bit tricky to do when you're using the write function. Well, now we can use TEXTAFTER. Again, we can say text is F6. What is our delimiter? Well, again, we're going to use the space delimiter. But this time, we want to specify an instance number. But if we want to, effectively, we want to count back from the end of the last name. So if we want to count back, we can say -1. So this is basically going to find the first space from the right-hand side. So it goes backwards through your string. And check it out, nice and simple. Doing that using the write function is a lot more complicated. Now, what about the middle initial just here? How do we do this? Well, this is where we can combine TEXTBEFORE and TEXTAFTER. Now, you can do this both ways. I'm going to go with TEXTBEFORE, and then we're going to jump straight into TEXTAFTER. And what we're going to say here is we want our text, which is cell F3. We want our delimiter, which is a space. And then we're back into our text before. Again, we want to specify our space delimiter. And we're going to say -1. Have I got that the right way around? I'm not sure. I think I have. And let's double click to copy down. And you can see that it's picked up everyone who has a middle initial, but we also have some NA errors in here. Okay, so where it can't find a middle initial, we basically have NA. So what can we do with this? Well, we can combine it with the if NA function to remove these NA errors. So let's jump up to the formula bar. If NA on the front here. And then at the end, we just need to specify what we want to output into the cell if it finds an NA error. So I just want a space. So we're going to put that in quote marks, hit enter. And this time when we copy down, we just have the middle initial and we don't have any NA errors in there. Okay, so this, believe it or not, is much simpler than using left, right, and mid to extract text. And these are so flexible, you can use them in so many different types of situation. Final example that I'm going to show you before we finish up is the text split function. Because again, this is another awesome new function which allows us to deal with splitting up text that has multiple delimiters. So if we take a look at this first example, so where we have employees, I've got Claire, comma, space Lucy, comma, space Mark. So this is fairly straightforward. I could say text split. I just need to specify where the text is and then specify my delimiter. So my delimiter in this case is a comma space. Close the bracket, hit enter, and it's going to separate those across based on that comma space. Now, if I was to try and copy this formula down, it doesn't work. Take a look at the second one. Why hasn't it worked? Well, it's because we have two different types of delimiter in here. So you can see we've got Harry, semicolon space, and then we have Max, colon, space. Okay. Now, the cool thing about the text split function is that it can handle multiple delimiters. So let's do this again. I'm just going to delete out all of this. Go for text split. Again, we just need to select our text. That's fine. But when it comes to the delimiters, if we have more than one, we need to put it inside curly brackets. Okay. So our first delimiter that we have in use here is comma space. And then we just specify our second delimiter, which is a semicolon space. And then we close the curly bracket and close off text split. That is all we need to do. And then when we copy this down, it's going to split those up correctly. So you can imagine the potential of this. If you've ever downloaded data or your data's in a right old mess, quite often you'll have multiple different types of delimiter in between different words, and you need to separate out all of that data. Currently, or before these functions, that was a really difficult thing to do. But now that we have these new text manipulation functions, it makes it so simple. So that's just a sneak preview. If you don't have Microsoft 365, this is what Microsoft 365 users are enjoying currently. This is just a taster. There are literally 10 more functions like this available in Microsoft 365. Thank you so much for joining. I hope you all enjoyed that. I hope you all learn at least one thing that you think is going to help you. Have a great night, a great afternoon, a great morning, wherever you are, and I will see you next time. Bye, guys.
If you're not a subscriber, click down below to subscribe so you get notified about similar videos we upload. To see the full course that this video came from, click over there. And click over there to see more videos from Simon Says It.